Hey there guys, welcome to my cynical yet justified reaction to Resident Evil 9's first trailer. And as Capcom, I'm going to call them Capcom right now, I don't know if it's old Capcom or new Capcom, I know the director of Resident Evil 7 is handling this particular Resident Evil title, which excites me. But at the same time, just watching this trailer, there was a sense of trepidation and hesitation instilled within me. But getting back on track, Capcom has described this for Resident Evil Requiem, also known as Resident Evil 9. In their official description, they mentioned this: Requiem for the dead, nightmare for the living. Resident Evil Requiem is the highly anticipated 9th title in the mainline Resident Evil series. Prepare to escape death in a heart-stopping experience that will chill you to your core. A new era of survival horror begins when Resident Evil Requiem launches February 27, 2026. That's what they had to say. And I gotta say, guys, when I first saw the initial shots from this trailer, I didn't realize it was Resident Evil. But then when I saw the isolated Resident Evil 9 trailer, this is what was shown. So yeah, this is actually how Resident Evil 9's first trailer starts off. And when I was watching the trailer, there was definitely a sense of disconnectedness. Like, Resident Evil Village, people might have thought was disconnected, but I didn't feel Resident Evil Village was disconnected from what Resident Evil was, especially when I knew Ethan Winters was the main protagonist. But seeing this initial shot of Resident Evil 9's trailer was definitely surprising, and this entire trailer just felt so disconnected to a lot of the lore that we know with Resident Evil. That's the feeling I got from this, and I'm not going to judge Resident Evil 9 as being a bad entry immediately. I know I made this mistake with Resident Evil 7 because at the time I was a really dumb Resident Evil player, taking advice from some really stupid gamers and having my entire perspective be dictated by the thoughts of a stupid few, and so I viewed Resident Evil 7 poorly when it first launched, and then when I played the game multiple times, I came to truly cherish Resident Evil 7 and hold it very close to my heart. So I'm not going to make the same mistake with Resident Evil 9 just based on this first trailer. So without further ado, let's actually get into this analysis. So the trailer first starts off at the FBI, and the FBI is barely mentioned in the Resident Evil series. Like, the most notable organizations we have in Resident Evil are the BSAA, the DSO, TerraSave, Blue Umbrella, and that's all we have for major organizations, and there's a lot of like minor terrorist organizations. Like I said, this is opening up at the FBI. Yeah, a really odd beginning for a trailer. I would not expect a Resident Evil title to start like this with, you know, a guy in a black suit walking through a government building. Because I would expect this kind of iconography in a Call of Duty trailer, not really with Resident Evil. And setting it with the FBI, that was just really odd. Like, I don't know why the FBI is the focus here, because the BSAA is the world's leading counter-bioterrorist organization within the Resident Evil universe. But we know that in Resident Evil Village, they're corrupt now. They're a rotten, ruined organization by 2021, and based on what the trailer has shown and using lore from Resident Evil 7, we know this game takes place after the events of Resident Evil Village, but I'll explain that. So nothing important is really being shown here. They have like the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, but nothing really related to Resident Evil's lore or anything like that. Like I said, I'm sure a lot of Resident Evil players would get really confused by the start of this trailer just because of how disconnected this feels. Oh, and also, by the way, a lot of the important lore from the previous games that are relevant to Resident Evil 9, I'm using the Resident Evil podcast team's website for this just to talk about them when possible. Let's resume. So this is the main character right here, and at first glance, I actually thought this was Rose, because she has like the blonde hair and her face kind of looks similar to Rose, but it's not. And then we also have this investigation summary report, which, again, it just feels very odd for the FBI to be doing this. I mean, I know they investigate bioterrorism in real life, but in the Resident Evil universe, the BSAA should have been doing this already. Or now that the BSAA is a rotten, ruined organization, the DSO should be doing this, or maybe Blue Umbrella. And we know that Blue Umbrella had a presence in Resident Evil Village through the med-injectors that they supplied, and also in Resident Evil Umbrella Corps. They were conducting clandestine operations to train their operatives, and they were also recovering vectors from different quarantine zones, like for instance with the Kajuju Autonomous Zone, and also from Valdelobos, which was the village in Resident Evil 4. And then they were also conducting training exercises in this model of Raccoon City. And they were also trying to bring back some fighting style that was developed by Hunk and also championed by Wesker, known as CQBZ, also known as Close Quarters Quarantined Battle Zone. So basically, Blue Umbrella had a good and bad side to it. And we know that Blue Umbrella is supposed to be the rival organization first mentioned in Resident Evil 2 OG, and they're also mentioned in Resident Evil Code Veronica X, Resident Evil 4 OG, and Umbrella Corps. If you want to understand how the rival organization evolved into Blue Umbrella, you can check out my Resident Evil 4 remake retrospective and look at the timestamps I've listed in the pinned comment. I'm just wondering if Blue Umbrella is returning here, but the fact that they've already ignored the Winters family and not really mentioned anything about the BSAA or Blue Umbrella, and instead we're focusing on the FBI, it's a little odd. But there's parts of this trailer that would make you think Blue Umbrella is returning because they show Raccoon City. They actually show Raccoon City at the end of this trailer. I'm just wondering if they're going to return and if they're going to have a bigger influence this time. Were they actually responsible for the BSAA's corruption in Resident Evil Village, or was the BSAA's corruption independent of that? They haven't even answered that question at the start of this trailer. It's a little odd that they don't try to tie into the events of Resident Evil Village, because the BSAA being corrupt is a very big story point, and you would assume they would be talking about that here, but apparently not. And we're just going to the FBI and they're investigating cases of bioterrorism. So this is apparently the fourth victim of some unidentified vector. I assume it's a virus of some sort, if they're going to showcase Raccoon City. Again, I'm not entirely sure why Raccoon City is just being shown here at the end of the trailer. It's the fourth victim. That seems kind of odd that it's the fourth victim. I would expect more victims. So we don't see what the full summary of the incident is because they want to keep that private. And again, nothing's really being shown here. I will say, the way they present Grace Ashcroft in this particular shot of the trailer, it just feels like that standard trope in media where you see the character with glasses stretching and doing all the motions with their arms because they're that invested in their work, and that's meant to convey that they're very smart but also socially awkward or something. It really felt like that particular trope when I was just seeing this shot.
Grace. Grace. Grace Ashcroft.
Yes?
Yeah, so Grace Ashcroft. And immediately when I heard that name, I was genuinely shocked because any big Resident Evil player will know exactly what this name refers to. Alyssa Ashcroft from Resident Evil Outbreak. So this character, Grace Ashcroft, is the daughter of one of the protagonists from a side Resident Evil title that released in 2003. Of all the times to introduce that kind of character, why for a mainline Resident Evil title? That is just so odd. And the last time we heard any mention of Alyssa Ashcroft was in Resident Evil 7, because she was reporting on the victims of the Baker family in Louisiana. And let me pull up that news article from Resident Evil 7. This news article from Resident Evil 7, this was written in January 19th, 2016, and it reads as follows. Over 20 missing in 2 years. Captain Howell from State Police told reporters they have started a search for Helen Midkiff, a college student from North Carolina who was traveling in Louisiana. Miss Midkiff hasn't been heard of since the night of the 21st. Reports of missing persons in South Louisiana have increased dramatically in the past 2 years. The majority of those missing are tourists and vagrants. At least 20 people are thought to have gone missing so far. Police suspect foul play and believe there may be a connection between the incidents. Plans are in place to step up local interrogations and increase personnel to further the investigations. Alyssa Ashcroft, January 19th, 2016. I guess that's why they chose Alyssa Ashcroft, because somebody from Capcom decided to look back at Resident Evil 7 and just saw that mention of Alyssa Ashcroft from Resident Evil Outbreak, and they just decided to mention her in Resident Evil 9 and then have the player play as her daughter, which is so odd. And I just don't understand why her daughter looks so similar to Rose. Does that not look like Rose but with glasses? I mean, the hairstyle might be different, but you'd assume the hairstyle is just because, oh, she's older or something. Even her face kind of looks similar to Rose. It's just such an odd thing with these RE Engine titles. Like the first trailer for Resident Evil 3 Remake, when I saw Jill, I thought she was Claire, but with a different hairstyle. That's what it looked like when I saw Jill in the first trailer for Resident Evil 3 Remake. And a similar kind of feeling has been evoked in me because Grace literally looks like Rose, but the resemblance feels way more uncanny compared to what it was like with Jill. It's just so odd. And the thing is that Alyssa Ashcroft, she does have blonde hair. I mean, her hairstyle is very different, and she wore like a red coat of some sort. But like, Grace doesn't even resemble that, so I'm genuinely surprised by that. And just to talk about Alyssa briefly, as mentioned on the Resident Evil podcast team's site, Alyssa was a highly respected freelance journalist who contributed to several major Raccoon City newspapers throughout her career, and she was a rival of Ben Bertolucci, who was that news reporter in the jail cell in Resident Evil 2. And she was described as being very egotistical and self-centered, brimming with confidence, and knew she was naturally attractive, making her obsessed with her looks. Really? That's pretty silly. Typical for a journalist, Alyssa was very argumentative and not afraid to speak her mind and ask tough questions. This led to a regular clash of personalities and arguments with those she worked with, so clearly Grace is nothing like that. So apparently in 1993, Alyssa and her colleague Kurt were working for the Comet News and were involved in an undercover investigation concerning suspected illegal dealings taking place at the old hospital in Raccoon Forest. As their investigation stalled through lack of evidence, Kurt decided to infiltrate the hospital undetected, but was killed by a zombified Dorothy Lester. All these kind of characters in Resident Evil Outbreak, definitely not important. So like, Alyssa witnessed this particular incident, and the incident was burned into her mind. She was heavily traumatized by the incident and suppressed the memory so deeply that she eventually forgot all about it. This was really in 1993. I don't know anything about Resident Evil Outbreak aside from the major events that occurred, like nothing really related to the story. I know about the vaccine Daybreak that was used in Resident Evil Outbreak, and I think it's mentioned in other Resident Evil media, but that's really all I know because nothing really important happens in Resident Evil Outbreak. I think there's like some minor details that bridge Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 to like the later games, but I really don't know. So some of the stories that Alyssa covered, her stories included the illegal dumping of pharmaceutical products in the Ames River and a high-profile gun shop robbery, but her biggest breakthrough was uncovering a major bootlegging operation at Raccoon Zoo involving the illegal importation of over 700 rare orchid specimens. Thanks to an anonymous source from inside the zoo, Alyssa was able to break the story and disgrace the chairman of the zoo's board of directors, Elliot Martin. So apparently, during the events of Resident Evil Outbreak, she encountered someone named Albert Lester, who's a BOW of some sort, or like an irregular mutant. I know he's some type of pursuer in Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, I believe. So she had apparently found documents dating back to the old 1993 conspiracy, as well as her colleague Kurt's old notebook. Being inside the hospital caused Alyssa to have several flashbacks, once again bringing to the surface of her mind the terrible things she and Kurt had experienced. So the experiments that were performed at that hospital, she knew that they were more than just human rights violations and that they were crimes against nature. She vowed to avenge Kurt's death after all these years and finally expose the truth. And this was her motivation for escaping the chaos in Raccoon City alive. So after the Raccoon City incident, Alyssa compiled all the information she collected during her time in Raccoon City and wrote a comprehensive article for the Daily Advisor entitled, "What is BOW? Blowing the lid of this horrifying secret project." So her testimony was used as evidence against Umbrella in the Raccoon trials, and then throughout the next decade and beyond, she remained a freelance journalist, and her adventures for the perfect story had taken her all over the United States. And then this leads into 2016, which was that piece for the Dolby Daily, talking about the disappearance of over 20 people, which I talked about. The Resident Evil podcast team mentioned that no doubt she had a huge interest in this case because it was similar to what happened in Raccoon City almost 2 decades earlier. So nothing really relevant to Resident Evil 9's story, it sounds like, or I could be wrong. Like maybe some old characters from Resident Evil Outbreak are probably going to appear in Resident Evil 9. It's still so odd. Like, why would they choose Resident Evil Outbreak as a reference point? Just because Resident Evil 7 briefly mentioned it in the report? It's odd.
My office.
Coming.
So I'm not really seeing any kind of major Easter egg. And Grace is a klutz, apparently. I mean, are they trying to make Grace seem like a klutz to make it seem like she's standing in the shadow of her mother, who was far more competent? Is that what they're trying to go for? Just seems kind of odd. But again, like, nothing really big happens at the start of this trailer. They're very vague about details, and they just show a bunch of disconnecting iconography from what you're really expecting from a Resident Evil trailer. I mean, there's no mention of BOWs. Like, they show imagery later on in the trailer, but that's really it.
If this is about the report you asked for yesterday...
See, again, like, doesn't that look like Rose? Or, like, from this angle, she looks like Claire, with the way her eyelashes look, and... Now I'm starting to see Jill here. I don't know, it just feels like they either used Claire or Jill's model as a reference point before designing Grace's model in this particular game, and then gave Rose's hair, but, like, the hair styling is different to Rose's. It's really odd.
It'll be ready in 3. No, 2 days, tops.
Put a hold on that for now. We found another body. One that exhibits the same pathology as the others we've been investigating.
But again, like, why is the FBI the primary organization investigating this and not organizations like the BSAA or Blue Umbrella? Blue Umbrella was established in 2007 after the Chapter 11 reorganization plan, and we know that Chris has been working with them because in Resident Evil Death Island, which takes place in 2015, he's using the Alberto 1. And it's still so odd that Blue Umbrella wasn't mentioned in Resident Evil Death Island because Dylan Blake, the main antagonist of Resident Evil Death Island, he hacked the DoD server, and he found classified information on Leon, Jill, Claire, and Chris. That should have been the perfect time to introduce Blue Umbrella into Resident Evil Death Island, but they didn't bother doing it. It was just a massive missed opportunity in Resident Evil Death Island. And speaking of Resident Evil Death Island, they used the T-Virus in that particular movie. It was a different variant, but I hope to God Resident Evil 9 doesn't try to use the T-Virus again, because I'm really getting sick of seeing the T-Virus. Like, the last time they used the T-Virus was Resident Evil Death Island, and then before that, they used the T-Virus in Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. It was a different variant, but it seemed pretty similar to the one in Resident Evil Death Island, aside from the fact that in Resident Evil Death Island, the T-Virus wasn't transferred through bites. There was no secondary infection, so if a zombie bit a human, the virus would not transfer onto the human. The only way that people could be infected is through the robotic drones developed by Dr. Antonio Taylor. I assume those drones are meant to be similar to the drones that U8 spawns during its boss fight in Resident Evil 5. They're bio drones, and they hatch from liquor hosts, and similarly in Resident Evil 5, those drones hatch from U8, so it's probably a similar mechanism. But ignoring that, I hope to God that this is not the T-Virus again, and just based on the way the BOWs look, it doesn't feel like it's the T-Virus, but I could be wrong, because the Lost in Nightmares DLC, you had those Guardians of Insanity, which were the big guys who could use that anchor or whatever it was to attack Chris and Jill. They exhibited rather bizarre mutations. I don't know if that's actually the T-Virus or the progenitor virus. I think it's the progenitor virus, actually, not the T-Virus. I mean, I know the T-Virus was derived from the progenitor virus. The T-Virus projects were made as a way to reduce the lethality of the progenitor virus, because direct exposure to the progenitor virus was very fatal because of, like, the high toxicity of the progenitor virus. But I know, like, Lisa Trevor from Resident Evil 1 Remake, she was injected with, I think it was like an alpha variant and a beta variant of the progenitor virus, and through her the G virus was found, because through exposure to those particular viral variants and also through exposure with the anti-alpha parasite, the G virus was found within Lisa Trevor, and that's how the G virus was started, and that would then lead into the events of Resident Evil 2. So I'm just wondering if we're dealing with a virus and whether it's the progenitor virus or the T virus in this particular game. But it's still so odd how disconnected this game is from Resident Evil 7 and Village. I mean, as a trilogy, you would assume that they would focus on the Winters family and on the Mutamycete. That's what it really felt like. But 2 games devoted to the Mutamycete and to the Winters family, and then the third entry comes in and it's just entirely different. Like, Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 focused entirely on Raccoon City. I mean, Resident Evil 1 was in the Arklay Mountains, but it's on the outskirts of Raccoon City. And then Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 is focusing on the aftermath and how Umbrella's data leaked onto the black market and various terrorist organizations got their hands on it. And we also have the Plagas as well, and then Trisol got their hands on the Plagas in Resident Evil 5, and then Ouroboros is a progenitor virus variant in Resident Evil 5, and then Resident Evil 6, it's showing the C virus, and the C virus was derived from a combination of an enhanced variant of the T Veronica virus called TO2. and it was combined with a variant of the G virus, and we know that Carla Redames, the creator of the C virus, obtained the T. veronica virus sample and the G virus sample from Manuela Hidalgo and Sherry Birkin respectively when they were both in protective custody with the United States government. So Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 were a trilogy in the sense that it was focusing on the aftermath of Raccoon City, and then Resident Evil 7 and Village focused on the Winters family, the Mutamycete, and also on Blue Umbrella. I'm not too sure if Resident Evil Requiem is going to focus on Blue Umbrella, but to have the Winters family appear in 2 Resident Evil titles, you would assume they would appear in the third one if you're focusing on Resident Evil 7, Village, and Requiem as a trilogy, but that's not the case apparently, and it's so bizarre. And the only way you can really call Resident Evil 9 as being part of a trilogy is the fact that Alyssa Ashcroft was mentioned in Resident Evil 7. So again, like, it's a really weird choice, and the fact that the director of Resident Evil 7 is handling this, it's even more bizarre. I'm confident, and I still should have reservations though, because Anpo-san, the director of Resident Evil 5, directed Resident Evil 4 Remake, and it's the worst Resident Evil title ever made, and the way they made a mockery of Resident Evil 4 OG's lore and ruined the story and characters greatly, as well as the gameplay, absolutely disgraceful. How the mighty have fallen. So if Resident Evil 9 is going to be another Resident Evil entry that showcases the downfall of a director, especially the director of my favorite Resident Evil title, that is going to be even more of a disappointment, for sure. But anyway, just getting back on track, the FBI not really consulting with the BSAA or Blue Umbrella. I mean, it's unclear if the BSAA is still around, and they've been found to be a rotten, ruined organization. And they don't seem to be in the Shadows of Rose DLC, which takes place in 2037. I don't know if they're going to continue the BSAA storyline. I really hope they do, because I'm really curious to see if it ties into Blue Umbrella's story.
Now, I need a good technical analyst on this.
Okay.
I need your eyes on the crime scene.
Okay, so his name is Nathan Dempsey.
The Rumwood Hotel.
The Rummet Hotel? I can't understand what he's saying. Okay, so we get a brief look at this. So I think this is a crime scene of some sort. You can see like the yellow tape and something on the ground there. I'm not entirely sure what this location is. And it's so odd for these flashbacks to be framed with this kind of filter on it, because we saw the same kind of filter in Resident Evil Village whenever Ethan would place the rose flasks into the Giant's Chalice. Like the first time he placed the rose flask, he saw a vision of Miranda taking Rose, and then the second vision was with all those lords standing around Rose. Like that's what this filter is supposed to look like. And also this filter looks very similar to the Remembering Resident Evil 7 cutscene from Resident Evil Village. So I just find it very odd that they would just show it like this, because I feel like that leads to a bit of confusion, because then you're thinking of the Mutamycete hallucinations, when I don't think it's the Mutamycete that we're dealing with. Because they would have identified it instantly, but apparently this is a new vector entirely that is unable to be identified, which is odd because Rebecca easily identified the T-virus in Resident Evil Death Island. I don't think it took her that long to identify the core components of the Animality virus in Resident Evil Vendetta, and she even developed a vaccine rather quickly. I mean, it wasn't a genuine vaccine because while it did prevent people from being infected by the A virus, or just like reverted the symptoms of trigger virus exposure to the latent virus, it didn't provide the genetic marker from the dominant plaga, because Glenn Arias utilized the DNA nucleotides from the dominant plaga, I believe, in the creation of the vaccine variant of the Animality virus, so that the zombies wouldn't attack anyone that had the vaccine variant within them. And so because Rebecca's vaccine lacked that genetic marker, that's why the zombies were still attacking her, despite the fact that she injected the vaccine into herself. Anyway, like, Rebecca identified the core components rather quickly, I believe. But apparently they're struggling to identify this new vector at play here. It must be a new vector of some sort, or some kind of enhanced strain of an existing virus. That's the only thing I can think of. Let me just see this location again. So, like, I don't know what this is. Like, this has to be the hotel, maybe? That Rummet Hotel? I don't know if that's how he's pronouncing it.
I know. That's where your mother was murdered.
So Alyssa was murdered there, apparently. And I can't tell if that is supposed to be Alyssa, because she looks very different to how she looked in Resident Evil Outbreak. Like, her hairstyle's different, her hair looks whiter than usual. Not really sure. And then we have this hooded figure. I have no idea who he is. And he's wearing a jacket that looks kinda similar to Lucas Baker's jacket. Because, like, Lucas had a hood on, but he had, like, the LCS on himself. This guy is completely different. This guy feels like a character from Condemned, that random Xbox game. So I'm curious to see what he does in this particular title.
Alyssa died 8 years ago.
So 8 years ago, and we know that she was alive in 2016. So this game takes place after the events of Resident Evil Village, but I don't know if it takes place in the 16-year gap between Resident Evil Village and the Shadows of Rose DLC, or after the Shadows of Rose DLC. Okay, so we have more shots of Alyssa, it looks like. I can't tell if this is Grace thinking of this, or they're trying to show scenes from the game, but they're confusingly trying to make it seem like it's a flashback of some sort. I mean, the character looks like she's wearing red, and Alyssa wore a red jacket in Resident Evil Outbreak. This seems to be the Remnant Hotel, and we have, like, an exit sign up there, it looks like.
Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
And we get this location right here. I'm not entirely sure what this is. I don't know if this is Raccoon City. I think this is the Remnant Hotel. And we see some group here. I assume they're conducting experiments of some sort. We have no idea who this group is. If it's Blue Umbrella, that's interesting. But I think it's just a separate organization.
Grace.
And then we get this. So Grace wakes up somewhere. She's been kidnapped. Now, this shot right here, I think of the Lost in Nightmares DLC, like when you put the shield emblem on that door and go through it. I just think of that hallway. It gives off that kind of vibe for me. The game looks nice, but I care more about the gameplay, and we don't get any gameplay in this particular trailer.
Stay close.
And we hear someone saying stay close. I don't know if that's Alyssa or somebody else. We have missing persons. I don't know if these are meant to be similar to those missing persons reports in Resident Evil 7. And we know that it's the 4th known incident of this unknown vector, as described in that summary report we saw earlier. We get the shot of the city, which I assume is just part of a cutscene. Similar to like the Shadows of Rose DLC at the start where Rose is in that park.
They're coming.
Somebody's coming. I don't know if that's Blue Umbrella or somebody else. It's probably just another shadow organization.
I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for.
Imagine if this guy was Kurt. Kurt from Resident Evil Outbreak. Because Kurt was killed by a zombified Dorothy Lester. But he would have been affected by the thermobaric missile strike at Raccoon City, right? So it can't be him. Unless he magically survived.
Special one.
So he says something here. What does he say?
I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for.
Searching for. So I don't know if that's talking about Grace or somebody else.
Special one.
Special one. What does this have to do with BOWs? What does this have to do with some kind of legacy that he has? And it's interesting that they're repeating a similar story point from Resident Evil Village where everyone was after Rose and their abilities because Mother Miranda wanted to revive her daughter Ava through Rose. And then the other lords were just following along with Miranda's plan, and they wanted to help put Ava into Rose's body for some reason. And like Moreau knew that Miranda was trying to bring back Ava, and Alcina said that Rose is our only hope. I mean, I'm not entirely sure why. And Heisenberg was going to use Rose to deal with Miranda, and then Beneviento wasn't really going to do anything with her. I mean, she does taunt Ethan, saying that everything would be better if Rose wasn't born, just to get on Ethan's nerves, but that cost her greatly because Ethan demolished her. So they're bringing a similar kind of story point into here where this main antagonist is after some character. It's a very interesting iconography, right? And, you know, like, it's to be expected because this echoes similar iconography from Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil Village. Because this literally gives me Oswald E. Spencer vibes from Resident Evil 5, and then the gramophone and the building he's in, it's like Resident Evil 1 Remake. I mean, less arcadey, though. I'm so glad they changed that. What this guy's role is going to be, I have no idea.
Chosen one. Miss Ashcroft.
Miss Ashcroft, yeah. And this is the major thing. So this is Raccoon City, guys. This is Raccoon City after that thermobaric missile strike occurred. And I'm amazed those buildings are intact, guys. How the hell are those buildings intact after a thermobaric missile strike? And the thermobaric missile is a completely fictional concept, and like it's not a nuclear strike, because obviously a nuclear strike would have caused the T-virus to mutate, and the radiation from the blast would have spread out to the nearby surroundings. And one of the main reasons the US government was able to get the authority to use the thermobaric missile strike was because of the isolated location of Raccoon City in the Midwest. I mean, like, this is not how the Midwest environment looks. So Capcom got that wrong about the Midwest, because the American Midwest is not as remote as what they believed. I'm just amazed that these buildings are intact. Like, if those buildings are intact, you would have to assume that some of the BOWs survived, right? Like, I really thought there would be no buildings left from Raccoon City, but I was wrong. That is crazy that there are these buildings left over. And there's not going to be any radiation, because again, the missile was thermobaric. It wasn't a nuclear strike. So why we're returning to Raccoon City, I don't know. Yes, Alyssa was involved in this incident, but what does the Rummet Hotel have to do with this location? What does this have to do with BOWs? This doesn't even look like a quarantine zone. I don't think a quarantine zone was ever established in Raccoon City, because the thermobaric missile wiped out huge traces of the virus. Of course, like, there are still zombies in the surrounding areas, because, you know, we have those dogs in the Arklay Mountains, and then you also have the viral leakage from the mansion getting into the tunnels that lead to the RPD. So, like, the RPD was ground zero in some ways, because, like, you have the sewers there, and, you know, like, those infected rats spread the T-virus to everyone in Raccoon City. And then the G-virus was also there because Birkin was infected with the G-virus. It was still so odd that Sherry Birkin was sent to the RPD. I don't know why Annette would tell Sherry to go to the RPD. Like, why didn't they have a better location when they know Chief Irons is heavily corrupt and unhinged, and a lot of viral leakage occurred from the RPD because of the tram system that connected the RPD to Birkin's lab, which is on the outskirts of Raccoon City. It's in the industrial zone on the outskirts of Raccoon City. Birkin's lab is not in the sewers. It's not in the sewers of Raccoon City. It's on the outskirts of Raccoon City in the industrial zone. And if they make the mistake of saying that Birkin's lab is in the sewers in Raccoon City, that's going to be bad. And what's even funnier is that in Resident Evil 0, you actually go to the tram that leads to Birkin's area. So Rebecca and Enrico missed the chance to destroy the G-virus in Resident Evil 0. And, like, they missed the chance to go to Birkin's lab, which would be the same lab that Leon, Ada, Claire, and Sherry would go to. It was so funny just realizing that, like, recently, in, like, these past few weeks, that Rebecca and Enrico missed the chance to destroy Birkin's lab. And the only reason they added that area into Resident Evil 0 is because they were trying to expand the game. That's what the Resident Evil podcast team said. The official developers of Resident Evil 0 said that area was added at the last minute to Resident Evil 0, which is why there's no concept art for that tram area in Resident Evil 0. Yeah, that is a really silly story point from Resident Evil 0. But if they reference not just the RPD, but also Birkin's lab, that'll be interesting. I really don't know what they're trying to do with this. Like, they might reference some locations from Resident Evil Outbreak, like the Apple Inn, because that seems to be the most synonymous location from Resident Evil Outbreak, or like the zoo, or the hospital. I have no idea.
Investigating all these strange deaths, huh?
Okay, so that's probably someone from the FBI.
We need to keep our voices down.
Okay, that's probably from the game somewhere, or maybe if that's Alyssa.
Have you seen the same shit I've seen?
I have no idea who that guy is.
Please know that you are my hope.
I'm guessing that's Alyssa, maybe?
Everyone's gone.
So here we have the RPD, which is obviously going to be remodeled after Resident Evil 2 Remix RPD. Also, I just remembered, I believe Resident Evil 9 uses a different engine. I think they're using an REX engine. It's a completely different engine to the RE engine that they've used since Resident Evil 7.
Everyone's gone.
Not too sure what she means by everyone's gone. And here we have this BOW. I don't know if that's a hallucination or something, because this looks like something from Resident Evil 3.5, with that really dumb version of Resident Evil 4 that was all about hallucinations and weird Silent Hill iconography, and it just didn't feel like Resident Evil. At least Resident Evil 7 and Village justified these hallucinatory moments. And if this really is a BOW, that's going to be interesting, but like, it feels more like a hallucination similar to the baby in Resident Evil Village. And this hooded guy is choking out this guy right here. I don't know if that's the same guy right here. He's telling Grace, I believe, to stay away, so he's probably infected. And there's something in the background there. What is that? Is that a painting? Or is that an actual enemy type behind this major enemy type? And we have a police officer? I can't tell if that's a police officer or not. His outfit is a little different. And he's wearing the police hat. He's mutating in response to some kind of virus. I would assume it's a virus. Or it could be some other vector. I'm not sure what this is. And we get our first shot at some kind of BOW, which I assume is going to be similar to a zombie, or maybe it's going to be similar to the Moriekas from Resident Evil Village. And the term Requiem means a mass for the dead, which is obviously related to the idea of the living dead in Resident Evil. So Requiem is defined as a mass or like a Christian ceremony at which people honor and pray for a dead person. Is this like their way of saying, oh, we're honoring those who have fallen, like the 100,000 civilians that perished in Raccoon City because they're bringing Raccoon City back? I don't know why they have to keep continually referencing Raccoon City, and now they're giving it a physical location in Resident Evil 9. Like, I just wish they wouldn't call back to Raccoon City so much, because there are far worser outbreaks than what happened in Raccoon City. I know Raccoon City was like the very first BOW outbreak, but still though, it doesn't need to be continually referenced. I mean, come on. You have the Lanchang incident, you have the New York incident from Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil Vendetta. Those are far worse with their outbreaks. Although one could say that Raccoon City was worse because it lasted for at least a week. And the thing is, the reason why it lasted for at least a week is because Oswald E. Spencer utilized his political influences to doctor footage showing the UBCS rescuing civilians and barely showing any BOWs. I don't know how much of what truly happened in Raccoon City actually got out to the public. I know we have the Raccoon trials, but with the thermobaric missile strike wiping away a lot of evidence, especially with the US government's involvement with the production of BOWs, given that they were Umbrella's first customers, it really puts into contention how much the public actually knew about Raccoon City and the BOWs that were there, because we know that in Resident Evil Revelations, after the Terra Grigia panic, there was a news report that actually brought BOWs to light, and this was in 2004. But getting back to what I was saying, Spencer's political manipulations prevented a lot of the truth from being revealed to the public with the way he was doctoring footage of what the UBCS were encountering. And, you know, this was definitely a factor that caused the Raccoon trials to go on for quite a long time, until 2003, when Wesker used the stolen data he got from the Caucasus laboratory to bring down Umbrella, while also using it for his own personal gains in order to gain a lot of power within the rival company. But yeah, I don't know how much of Raccoon City's history they're actually going to apply to this particular game and how that relates to the way Alyssa Ashcroft died. I'm not really sure. And that's all we get for this trailer, which, again, like, it just felt very disconnected from the lore that we know, especially since it's taking place after the events of Resident Evil Village. And, you know, like, there's no mention of the BSAA being corrupt, there's no mention of Blue Umbrella, and, like, the FBI is the one handling these incidents involving vectors and not the BSAA or Blue Umbrella. I mean, the BSAA is probably gone for all we know, if their corruption was as high as it was in 2021. I really have no idea. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to bring the existing organizations into this particular title. If, you know, Grace is working for the FBI, or they're probably not going to mention them, or maybe they'll just be mentioned in files or something. It's so disconnected from what Resident Evil 7 and Village were going for, basically. That was the vibe I was getting with this particular trailer, but who knows, there could be something very interesting with this. And that's all speculation with the story, but I'm really curious to see what the gameplay is going to be like. With Resident Evil 4 Remake setting a very poor foundation for the gameplay, and with the number of broken designs that got through to Resident Evil 4 Remake, I just feel like Resident Evil 9 is probably going to be the same, and hopefully that's not the case, because, I mean, a different director handles each of the Resident Evil titles, so maybe there could be some differences there. And, replaying Resident Evil 2 Remake after playing Resident Evil 4 Remake and doing the retrospective, and also replaying Resident Evil 2 OG after a very long time, I have a greater appreciation for the gameplay of Resident Evil 2 Remake, even if it's still a very dull experience. Resident Evil 3 Remake, I have a much greater appreciation for, and I can definitely understand what they're trying to go for with the gameplay. I can understand its flow, I understand the way it's designed. It's pretty intelligent with the way it's designed. And Resident Evil Village, it's a good title, but you spend so much time running past the enemies. There's a lot of poor gameplay foundations that led to you just running past the enemies and relying upon exploits to balance out the gameplay. You had damage spongy bosses, and replaying Resident Evil Village many times, especially after playing Resident Evil 4 Remake many times. I've lightened up with Resident Evil Village greatly, and I really enjoyed going through it. I replayed Resident Evil Village entirely the other day, and it was a lot of fun. But Resident Evil 4 Remake was just such garbage. Nothing has changed with the way I feel about Resident Evil 4 Remake, because there's so many objective issues with the story, objective issues with the gameplay, objective issues with the characters. Hopefully it's not going to be the same case with Resident Evil Requiem. I mean, the chance to play a new Resident Evil title is always so rejuvenating in my case. Even if Resident Evil 4 Remake was an absolute travesty, the chance to play a new Resident Evil title is always so engaging, because it's the one series that I feel such a great connection with, and it actually feels like it's a game series, unlike all these other trendy game series or game series that chase existing formulas, or they regurgitate concepts to just milk their audience, or the stupid online experiences, the stupid Call of Duties, the stupid Souls clones that are just so unimaginative. Resident Evil's actually feeling fresh every single time because of the fact that they can change the way the games look with their gameplay or with other things, with their tone, but still make it feel like Resident Evil. So maybe when I play Resident Evil Requiem, I'll feel the same way. Who knows? We'll have to see. And it releases on February 27th, 2026. So that's good. I mean, because I think Resident Evil 7 released in January of 2017, and Resident Evil 4 Remake released in March, was it? Or was it April? I don't recall, from 2023. So yeah, this is a pretty good release date. I just hope there aren't any complications. I just hope that, they're not going to split their development team into 3 teams like they did with Resident Evil 4 Remake and impact the quality severely. I just hope there's a singular focused vision with this particular Resident Evil title. But we'll have to see. But overall, guys, I don't feel like this trailer was the best showcase for Resident Evil 9's first reveal. This doesn't have the same kind of energy as the first trailer to Resident Evil Village. I feel like they emphasized on the right points with the first trailer of Resident Evil Village. This, I don't feel like they're emphasizing on the more important aspects or the more crucial to a Resident Evil title. In the first trailer for Resident Evil Village, you got the chance to see the village, you got a chance to see the villagers, you got a chance to see the BOWs, you saw the lords. You were seeing so much in that one trailer, and it still felt very mysterious. That is how you properly do a trailer for Resident Evil Village. That's why I said at the time that the marketing was really strong for Resident Evil Village, but I just feel like they took some steps backwards with this very first trailer to Resident Evil 9, and they just didn't emphasize on the right aspects. It just felt like they used more fan nostalgia, with the fact that you're playing as the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, and the fact that you're going to Raccoon City literally. That's really all we're getting, and then the rest of the stuff is just the guy walking through a government building, and then he's just saying stuff to Grace, and that's really it. That's not how you do a trailer for a Resident Evil title. And I actually saw a leak that may or may not be true that indicates that Leon is actually the main character of Resident Evil 9, but Grace is more so a side character, which is very odd to hear. I mean, I get why people would assume that would be the case, because Raccoon City, it ties in heavily to Leon. But this trailer puts such a heavy emphasis on Grace, and the fact that this mysterious antagonist seems to need her for something because she's the chosen one. So, I don't know if that leak is true. But we'll have to see what the game is going to be like when it actually releases. But like I said before, this trailer doesn't sell Resident Evil 9 that well. I feel like they could have done much better with the selling point. But that has been my cynical yet justified reaction to Resident Evil 9. I will gladly do other reaction videos when more Resident Evil 9 trailers release. And I'm going to look forward to this particular Resident Evil title just to see what happens. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.